illegal gambling in casinos in Louisiana.
Closer to home, Costello owned the Copacabana, one of New York's hottest nightclubs, a place where politicians, entertainers, star reporters, and gangsters could all mix. But with Vito gone, a split was developing in the family between the Genovese faction and the Costello crowd.
By and large, most of the people with Costello were making more money than the group Genovese had left behind. So there was a jealousy and an animosity there.
In Italy during World War II, Vito donated money to the fascists and is believed to have done the dictator Benito Mussolini a favor in January 1943. Genovese allegedly ordered the murder of an anti-fascist newspaper editor, Carlo Tresca, who was living in exile in New York. At the end of the war, Vito was extradited back to the U.S. to face the murder charge he had fled. In a mysterious coincidence, the key witness who had agreed to testify against Vito was found dead in his Brooklyn jail cell, supposedly of an overdose of sleeping pills. Without a strong witness, the murder charge was dropped. Genovese was back on the street. Meantime, any hope Lucky Luciano had of regaining his position as leader of the crime family dissipated when in 1946 he was deported back to Italy. Now Vito could focus on slowly undermining his longtime rival, Frank Costello.
He plays it very shrewdly. He doesn't begin to think that he can make his move until Costello gets in trouble.
And troubles were growing for Costello. A wiretap on the phone in his apartment on Central Park West had recorded the crime boss telling a grateful nominee for the state Supreme Court, "When I tell you something is in the bag, you can rest assured." The nominee responded, "I want to assure you of my loyalty for all you have done." Such revelations earned Costello the title of Prime Minister of the Mob. This was not the kind of attention the crime family appreciated. Then, in March 1951, Costello answered a subpoena to appear before a traveling Senate committee led by Estes Kefauver of Tennessee, which was investigating organized crime. Most gangsters who were called to testify took the Fifth Amendment. Not Costello. He craved respectability and wanted to tell the world he was just a retired gambler, not a crime boss.
You must have in your mind some things you've done that you can speak of to your credit as American citizen. If so, what are they? Paid by tax.
Now Vito saw his opening. In October 1951, in a clear sign that he did not fear Costello, he arranged the murder of a sick member of the crime family, Willie Moretti, who had been allied with Costello since childhood.
Moretti had syphilis and was going crazy and ended up, I think, what was described as like a mercy killing, because they were afraid he was going to start blabbing.
Costello's stature in the crime family was weakened further as authorities pursued him relentlessly for tax evasion. A crime that would eventually land Costello in prison for a total of 5 years. But Vito also had a hard time staying out of court. His wife Anna filed for divorce in 1952. Citing his womanizing and several beatings she said she endured. Anna exposed Vito's role in the rackets and estimated his income at $40,000 a week. She also described their luxurious lifestyle at a 14-room mansion along the New Jersey shore. It was then in May 1957, with his star still rising in the crime family, that Genovese sent hitman Vincent Gigante to eliminate Costello. And even though Costello survived, the assassination attempt served its purpose. Costello retired from the crime family. But Vito's rise to the top was not yet complete. He still needed the assent of the various crime family captains, or capos.
So he sent word out to all of them. Costello has retired. I want you to come in and let me know that you're pledging your loyalty and fealty toward me. And almost all of them came in.
The one who did not come, a capo named Augie Pisano, who was outraged at what Vito had done to Costello, was eventually murdered, along with his mistress. There were 2 other hits Vito was instrumental in arranging, 2 more allies of Frank Costello to eliminate, to clear his path to the top. There was New York crime boss Albert Anastasia, who had always provided muscle and hitmen to Costello, and Anastasia's underboss, Frank Scalise. In June 1957, Scalise was gunned down inside a fruit and vegetable store in the Bronx.
Then in October, Albert Anastasia goes into a hotel barbershop. Two young men come in and started pumping bullets into Albert Anastasia. He fell out of the barbershop chair and was very, very dead.
With the retirement of his rival Frank Costello and the assassination of his rival's ally, Albert Anastasia, the stage was set for Vito Genovese to take over the crime family. But something funny happened on the way to the top in a little town in upstate New York called Appalachian. The Mafia Commission and Vito's role in it would be exposed to the entire world. That's next. In the fall of 1957, the violent grab for power by Vito Genovese had helped throw the entire New York underworld into its worst turmoil since the street wars of the early 1930s. Vito, who had taken over as boss of his crime family, called an emergency meeting of the Mafia Commission.
He wanted a national meeting to let them know what had happened and to explain to all of the other families around the country it should be business as usual.
So on Thursday, November 14th, the leaders of the major crime families around the country, more than 100 gangsters in all, gathered at this house just outside the tiny western New York village of Appalachian. Also on their agenda was a mafia ban on drug trafficking. Congress had recently passed the Narcotics Control Act, making it a federal offense to deal in illegal drugs.
If you were caught dealing in narcotics, the penalties were significant, and they were afraid that their members would begin to cooperate. So it wasn't merely based on a moral decision, it was based on a very pragmatic decision.
What was not at all pragmatic was the gangsters' choice of a place to meet. The house where they gathered belonged to a local mobster and was under regular surveillance by police.
More than 100 people from all parts of the United States meet outside of a tiny village of 1,100 people. You know, they increased the population by 9%.
Not surprisingly, they were soon discovered by an alert New York State trooper. 58 gangsters, including Genovese, were arrested. They could not be prosecuted for any crime as a result of the raid, but it was an intelligence bonanza. The first solid proof that a national organization of gangsters existed.
Some of the people involved never forgave Vito Genovese for having insisted on that meeting, which represented the high watermark of Cosa Nostra. Things were never as good after that as they had been before that.
The biggest shock in my life was the paper that I read at the Appalachian meeting. I never could forget my mother saying to me, "See, I told you he's a bum."
Less than a year after Appalachian, Genovese was called before the Senate Labor Rackets Committee, chaired by John McClellan of Arkansas.
How many deaths, murders do you suppose you are directly responsible for?
I respectfully decline to answer on the ground that my answer may tend to incriminate me.
The chief counsel to the committee was Robert F. Kennedy.
Tell us anything about Mr. Albert Anastasia being killed in New York City on October 25th, 1957.
I respectfully decline to answer on the ground that my answer may tend to incriminate me.
In all, Vito invoked the Fifth Amendment more than 150 times. Then, American justice caught up with the crime boss. In January 1959, the feds, using their new narcotics law, charged him with a conspiracy to import and distribute drugs. Now Vito found himself attracting the same kind of relentless and unwelcome attention that his rival Costello had faced years earlier.
Is it true that you're the head of the mafia in this country?
It is not.
Well, sir, have you ever been connected with the mafia at any time?
Never.
What about the government's charge that you're the right man, that you're the #1 man in this narcotics business?
Charges are fantastic and ridiculous.
The case against Vito was based on the rather flimsy testimony of a single, small-time drug pusher who claimed he attended a meeting in the Bronx with Genovese, at which a conspiracy to distribute narcotics was discussed.
The idea that a low-level pusher or dealer would in any way have direct dealings with a boss is absurd.
In April 1959, Genovese, now 62 years old, was found guilty and given a 15-year sentence. He was sent off to federal prison in Atlanta. For the next 10 years, he directed the affairs of the crime family from his prison cell.
It's not that hard to do. Years ago, it was a lot easier because they corrupted all the prison guards. Now they can't do that anymore, but it was very simple. Years ago, if you saw Goodfellas, the movie, where they had the big meals in prison and the wine, and it was even worse than that. They had women in, they had drugs, they had everything, because they paid off the guards.
In his absence, Vito named 3 members of the crime family to run the rackets in New York, so that each would keep an eye on the others, and none would threaten his ultimate control. Vito's next target was a soldier in the family who was also his cellmate in the Atlanta penitentiary, a hitman named Joe Valachi. Vito had been the best man at Valachi's wedding, but now he heard rumors that Valachi had tried to cooperate with the feds.
And Valachi very graphically describes how Genovese came up to him and kissed him on both cheeks without any explanation. And he said, I knew what it was. It was the kiss of death. He was going to order me to be killed.
Convinced that he was a marked man, Valachi became so paranoid that he would not even take a shower for fear he would be ambushed. One day in the prison yard, Valachi picked up a piece of pipe that had been left behind by some workmen.
He walked up behind one of the men that he thought was on the assassination team and beat him on the head and killed him.
The man was not an assassin. Now Valachi was facing a new murder charge and still feared he was a target. So in exchange for a transfer to another prison, Valachi did become a rat. In September 1963, he went before a Senate committee and a national TV audience.
But I'm telling you what I'm exposing to you and the press and everybody. This is my doom.
Valachi's testimony did not lead directly to the prosecution of any mobster, but it did something more significant. It mapped out the structure of the mafia for the first time, giving law enforcement an understanding of how the crime families operated.
He reeled off names that allowed them to put together flow charts and talk about particular regimes and who was the head of this regime and who were members underneath it. That's what he did. He named names.
And once again, Genovese's friends said, because he fouled up, because he's ordering a guy hit who maybe didn't even deserve it, now we are exposed to the outside world.
Valachi's description of the mafia ritual of initiation has never been challenged.
He picks your finger. Who? The Godfather. He picks your finger. He picks your finger with a needle. Makes a little blood come out. In other words, that's the express the blood relation.
6 years after the Valachi testimony, in February 1969, Vito died of heart failure in prison. He was 72.
I think certainly Vito Genovese was a figure in Cosa Nostra history that established a norm to become a boss. In Genovese's case, it was the ability to generate fear, to create homicides where necessary, to rule with an iron thumb.
In the years following the death of Vito Genovese, the crime family managed to wrap itself in a shroud of secrecy. But law enforcement soon had a surprise for them and the other New York crime families. Wiretap evidence exposing one of the most lucrative rackets ever. Evidence that would force the mafia to do something it had never done before. Admit in open court that it really...
After the death of Vito Genovese,